Welcome to Pursley's Appraisers on Purpose. In this season, we journey through the realm of technology and connect with valuation and data analysis experts who are at the forefront of industry transformation. We dive deep into how technology is redefining asset analysis, identifying trends, and enhancing professional valuation skill sets. Join us as we meet with leading minds to discuss the revolutionary intersection of technology and traditional processes with our host, real estate investor, entrepreneur, and chief appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Well, welcome back and welcome to another episode of Pursley's The Power of Values. Once again, just thrilled to have a peer and a fascinating guest with us. We have Chase Pursley with us today. Chase, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, man, I'm so glad and honored to be here. I've been listening to this podcast for a while, and man, it's great to be a guest. Pretty excited to talk about it.
Man, I appreciate it. It's so informative to get to hear other people's experiences and things that they're up to. And this season 4, is no different. Chase is one of those interesting and accomplished peers who didn't just think about another way of doing things. He's actually just doing it. So before we get too far in, make sure to like the podcast on whatever medium you're grabbing this on, whether that's Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or nowadays it's also on YouTube. And of course, I fully expect that you're going to be filled with ideas, thoughts, and even comments. So make sure to add those as well, because that all contributes to expanding the influence and the impact that this podcast gets to have, which we're excited to continue to pay it forward. So with that, Chase, we want to know, were you born this way, or how did your life come to intersect the valuation and appraisal industry?
Yeah, I love this question. I've listened to this podcast for a while, and I haven't kept count of how many, but it seems like a large percentage of appraisers were born this way. They had the great luck to be born into a family that's been doing appraisal or some kind of real estate related work, and I had an opportunity to enter the industry that way. Myself, not so much, but I did study real estate in college, so I have a degree with a focus on real estate, and I wanted to go in the commercial analysis direction. I had been thinking about appraisal work for a while, so that was kind of my entry in. I had the great luck of graduating in 2008 when there were no jobs.
Lucky you, 2008, Chase. I mean, could you pick a better year to graduate? But wait. Maybe I missed something. Did you say you not only studied real estate in college, but you'd actually thought about it for a while? Like, what happened to you as a young person that you even thought about this? Because I've not heard people say that.
Yeah, so you've probably heard of this book series called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, where there was a book.
You mean Robert Kiyosaki influenced your life?
Yeah, well, not him so much. There was another book in the series. There was another guy. I can't remember the author's name. I think maybe he was from New Zealand. I mean, he wrote a book about investing. I think it was in single-family housing.
Okay.
Just where he had a 9 to 5 job, and I borrowed the book from a friend, and I can't remember. Maybe I was in high school, and I just plowed through that book, and I was like, man, this is fascinating. And I had been a commercial landscaper. My father owns a commercial landscaping company. So I'd been his child labor, starting at a pretty early age. Through them, yeah.
Oh, that was good, Chase. I love it, man. I love it. That was fantastic. But pardon me for interrupting.
So during summers and weekends, I was out there, digging holes in the ground and planting trees and doing commercial landscaping installation jobs mostly. And through that, got to meet some developers and thought it was just really fascinating. So, that kind of sparked my interest in commercial real estate. And I kind of thought at first I wanted to be a developer. So between the book that I read and talking to these developers, funny enough, over time I ended up becoming a software developer, product developer. But that was that kind of wet my tongue, and I wanted to study real estate. So I went to Georgia State University in Atlanta. They have a great real estate program.
Sure.
I studied real estate there and just, graduated. I have this thing with timing, I guess, in my life where the timing sometimes can be a little bit off, or maybe not off, depending how you look at life. So I graduated 2008 in the summer, and there were basically no jobs, but I really thought hard about going into the appraisal profession. So I went and did my initial training with the Appraisal Institute, and I'm sitting here in a USPAP class, and there was a lady sitting next to me, and started talking to her. and she explained that she was a commercial appraiser who focused on senior housing.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. Senior housing is a niche that I was kind of thinking about, because through this landscaping, I basically ran the installation job for a couple assisted living facilities, private assisted living facilities, and got to know the owners, and thought it was I started looking into the demographics and thought that was a pretty good niche to be in. And so I asked her if she was hiring. She said, not really because of the market, but we could use some help. And she also told me, I'm not really that great of a business manager. I'm not really great at managing, other people. So you probably don't want to work for me. So I told her, great, I'll take the job. So I took the job, and it was really fascinating. And she lived up to her word. Great appraiser, really knew what she was doing, but she was kind of the lone wolf appraiser. And I think she just didn't want to mess with managing a bunch of people and that sort of thing. So I understood that, but I still had a chance to learn a lot about the niche. It was really interesting niche, and at the time there was not a lot of companies focusing on senior housing. So our market was the entire United States. So kind of a cool perk with our job that's different than a local appraisal company that doesn't really specialize. Is I got to fly around the whole country, a lot of times driving regionally. So I get to drive out of state pretty frequently. And I get to fly out from Georgia all the way to California, all the way down to the Florida Keys to look at senior housing homes, senior housing properties, like assisted living, nursing homes, continuing care, retirement community type of properties. So I got to also look at some portfolio properties, which was interesting. You go and look at 10, 20 different senior housing, nursing homes. So it was really interesting. And we did, even though she was the lady I was working for was kind of a lone wolf, we did have a small team in the Atlanta area. And the way we were keeping up with kind of our orders and what everyone was working on was just by emailing, I guess, what you could call a super job log, like an Excel super job log.
Okay. Sure.
And this kind of back before everybody was in the cloud. I think some of that's I think Dropbox was already out, but we were emailing this document back and forth, and it had like what everybody was working on, what was in the pipeline, and it had our historical log of appraisal orders. And of course I was using, copying that, using it to track my, log my hours for my licensing. But it was always out of date, and information was incorrect. So we had to email each other back and forth all the time. And it was just really frustrating. And I thought to myself, this is kind of, there has to be a solution to this. So I went and Googled around. I guess that was Google error. Yeah. I guess I didn't Yahoo around too much.
Sure.
So I Googled around and found some products that were kind of focused towards the banks and the lending institutions, for them to manage their appraisal order workflow and send those out to the appraiser. They weren't really focused on the appraisal firm themselves. There were some, but they were either really, it's like one of these, call us to get a price.
Yes.
$10,000 or something ridiculous. So I thought to myself, I had a little programming experience, built some websites and that sort of thing. So I thought to myself, how hard could this be? Kind of naively.
Sure.
And so I went out and started doing this initial, basically, web application to manage order workflow. So basically, you go and add your appraisal order, put the date. It gets, the date goes into the calendar. The appraisal order gets linked to the client. So pretty simplistic, but it worked. And I started talking to some people who I did my Appraisal Institute classes with, and they said, this sounds pretty useful. Where, everybody was kind of doing the same thing, emailing this spreadsheet back and forth. Some people had built their own databases. So that's how we got started. And I was like, oh, okay, this is a product. So I turned it into a product. We originally called Appraisal Flow.
Okay.
So like for the first 7 or 8 years of company's existence, we were Appraisal Flow. Then we changed the name. There was kind of a conflict of a naming with another company, and so decided to change the name, and kind of decided to change the focus of what the product was. Still, it's still the same idea of being an application for handling your appraisal orders and handling the office side of things. So your orders coming in, getting logged to the system, your team logs in and gets their appraisal order information. It's all focused around the status and stuff. We changed the name to Appraisal Inbox, and the idea with that is, you have a single inbox where all your appraisal orders flow into. And the idea is it should be as easy to use as your Gmail, your Outlook email inbox. So it's kind of that's kind of how that made the transition to building a product. So went from commercial appraiser to a software entrepreneur, I guess you could say.
Wow. Wonderful. And so this, at the time that you were developing this solution or considering that maybe I could develop a solution, were you still actively appraising senior housing across the country?
Yeah, I was. So I was a senior housing appraiser for a little bit more than, I guess, 3 years. So I wasn't at it for a long time.
Yeah.
So as soon as it made sense, I went into it full time.
Good for you. That's exciting to hear. I mean, it's always one of the fascinating things about the paths, although I should say the on-ramps and off-ramps along the road of life that lead in different directions. And so because of your exposure and the challenge that you were experiencing, you're like, there must be a better way. And so you went to work on that.
Yeah, it's been a fun road.
That's fascinating. So I'm curious, we don't get a lot of individuals who actually, on the podcast, they who have actually gone to college with the expectation to study real estate. And that was something you did. What was that experience like studying the real estate from an academic standpoint, having maybe been exposed from a commercial landscaper and that, child contribution to your dad's business compared to graduating and actually getting in the real world? Can you share some comparing and contrasting experiences for us?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this, it's a lot better. It was a lot better than getting out into the August heat, the muggy August heat in Atlanta, Georgia, and plowing a shovel into the ground, at 2 p.m., losing just gallons of water. I mean, you literally had to drink out of a gallon jug, to stay hydrated.
Yes.
So it's definitely better than that, but it was also much more difficult. The commercial real estate path is an analysis path. You basically business analysis at the same time as being a real estate expert. So I guess that if I could say what I liked best about studying real estate in school was exposure to accounting, even though I failed the first time.
Okay.
It was really that hard. It was really different. I didn't originally kind of have a mathematical background. I kind of eventually became a programmer.
Mm-hmm.
And became a commercial appraiser, then also doing programming stuff. But I never really loved math as a kid, so I found accounting really challenging in some of the other math classes that I took. But I also found it highly useful. So the other useful classes of accounting, real estate law was really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And there were a couple other classes, like we had like an Argus class. I can't remember all the ones we took, but if you're somebody listening to this who's in high school and who's thinking about the commercial real estate path or analysis path, I highly recommend looking for a school that has a good program, a good real estate program.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. That's fantastic foresight for younger people that may not have that perspective or don't have someone immediately in their life to give them some connection to the commercial property industry or valuation in general. So that makes a world of difference. How did it differ from you getting to take the courses versus going out in the real world?
I feel like it did pretty much prepare me. But, the real world's different. The real world, university is a lot of theory, a lot of case studies, that sort of stuff. The real world is a lot of paper pushing. Maybe that's not the right word. There's a lot of double entry, a lot of research. So like back then, it was a lot of clicking through property record websites and figuring out how to navigate those things and downloading information. And, there was a lot more sleuthing and research you have to do in the real world than you do in school. Now, I think that, I don't know if that's a teachable skill or an acquired skill, but that's something that you spend a lot of time doing as an appraiser or somebody in commercial real estate. It's just knowing how to find data, knowing how to qualify data. And I think you just had Mark, I can't remember how to pronounce his last name, Ruxin with Hello Data.
Yep.
That's kind of something he's interested to. It's like data quality,
yes,
and that sort of stuff.
It's such an important point that you touch on that was just not a factor that people thought of at scale in prior decades. They definitely dealt with it, especially if they were dealing with either mass appraisal or they were dealing with large, say, tort cases, or they're involved as a litigation expert across a significant geography. But for someone who's working on a smaller scale or in a smaller market or a particular property type, that routinely wasn't as big of a factor. But as you touch on, it is extremely important and really the highlight of many programs these days and the university environment, which is a good thing. It's calling attention to that data integrity and, data indexing and data analysis.
Yeah, just to give you an example, so I mentioned that it was basically all over the country.
Yes.
So, if you're somebody like, just for example, in the Atlanta area who does, gas station appraisals all over the state of Georgia, or maybe local to Atlanta, or some kind of hotels or whatever it might be. You already have a good list of comps. You have, you have your land comps, your rent comps. I mean, it's all local. You know how to navigate the county website or whatever local jurisdiction to get the property records. You basically have a huge, rich data set, or you should if you've been at it for a while. If you're going out into the middle of Iowa to some county that has, 5 government employees, getting data, it's a real challenge. Finding, our comp radius for the actual senior housing facilities was much larger, just because there's only so many of them. But, we still had to find land comps and pull property public records. And that was a challenge. Each market you had to, figure out where that was. You had to go, look up where their offices were if they did not have an online portal. It's better now than it was before.
Yes.
But that was all extremely time consuming. And then you had to, then you had to get to know that market. You had to get to know the history. You had to get a feel for, the economic development situation, or, kind of get a gauge of where things are going, versus, copying and pasting that out of your, if you're an appraiser focused on just one area, you can just copy and paste that and update it occasionally. We had to write that up each time from scratch.
Yep.
So it was really fascinating. I'm somebody who likes history. Like I'll read a few books a year, just whatever history topic, fascinates me. So I like that part of the job, go figure out, how that town started and, all the way up through economic development things. So it's fun. It's a fun path. If you like research, if you like writing, you have to be a pretty good writer to work on commercial appraisals. So pretty interesting.
I appreciate you touching on that. It's always fascinating how people's personal interests and areas of study open up avenues going forward. And for you, I appreciate you mentioning that, having that exposure, comparing and contrasting that experience, and then, being frustrated by a common challenge, which is, how do we stay up to date? How do we keep a small team, much less a large team, informed and connected without it actually turning into someone's full-time job?
Yeah, exactly. In this industry, and I'm sure other industries, but especially this industry, there's just so much double entry. There's a lot of copy and pasting, data out of a property record portal into an Excel spreadsheet or wherever you need that data out of an email. And there's so much duplication, and it's all very time consuming. And, our value added as commercial real estate people and commercial appraisers is the analysis, not the busy work, not the office work, not the clicking into the county records to download that data. In my opinion, I think we are moving, but I think, we should be really trying to move to a place where we're reducing, where systems are interconnected, where data flows, where we're not having to do as much double entry, so we can actually focus on, the meat and potatoes of work, and that's the analysis, versus all the busy work of copying, pasting, and some of that initial research. And that's one of the things that gets me pretty excited about AI in generative AI and that sort of thing. It's all still pretty early, and not just AI, but data integrations, data sources.
Yes.
The state of the industry right now is a heck of a lot better than it was 10 years ago.
Yes.
But it still has a long way to go. We still have to do a lot of the busy work. Some of these systems are still pretty clunky, not well integrated. So there's a lot of work to be done.
That's a great point in recognizing what is available in terms of improvements and evolution, and at the same time, acknowledgement of what doesn't exist as it sits today amongst everything else that's going on. Given the role that you had and the responsibilities, and then your personal interest, was it a natural conclusion that you would be someone who was in appraisal and would go on and essentially form a technology solution? Or was that just kind of a stroke of luck?
No, never. I always liked computers as a kid. I was never really a gamer. I just liked the technology. So every time I would go over to a friend's house, I would make a beeline for their computer. This was back when people had Amigas and all kinds of, now it's pretty much just Mac and PC, but people had all sorts of interesting computers sitting around their house. So I would go, just go click around, and I've probably destroyed a couple of their computers in the process. And it was pretty fascinating, but it never occurred to me to learn how to actually control the computer and how to program computers. And eventually I found myself in a situation where I needed to build like a marketing website, or at least I wanted to offer to help build a website. And it was another one of these, how hard could it be? And of course, those sorts of things are always way harder than you expect. That's anything.
Case, where was just to help people get a sense? Because that difficulty changes, but it wasn't easy back then.
I might have been in college when I built my first website, and I'm talking about like HTML, CSS, just like photos and text, like no database, no logging in, nothing like that, just a brochure website. And I built one from my father's landscaping company. Okay. So going back to that and kind of taking me down this particular path. So I built one from my father's landscaping company, and then I tried to build one for a brokerage company that I was working for a little while. So
okay.
If you have a degree in the state of Georgia, maybe this has changed. You want to look up your local laws. But if you have a degree in real estate in the state of Georgia, you can just go sit and take your real estate salesperson exam.
Oh, really?
And so it was another one of those how hard could it be scenarios. So I went and showed up, didn't study at all. I assumed I knew everything I needed. And I took the test, and it was a lot harder than I expected. But it was a lot easier than any of the real estate appraisal exams, that's for sure. But I barely passed. Like I had I was within a couple points of failing. And so I got my real estate sales license. Wasn't anything that I was particularly passionate about, but hey, all you have to do is go sit and get a license, why not, right? So I did, and I got my license, and I thought, maybe I can make a little extra money, like as a leasing agent or something while I'm still in college. And so I worked for this lady who had a commercial real estate appraisal firm on the south side of Georgia, or south side of Atlanta. And I leased a couple of units out. It was interesting. I didn't love it. Yep. It's more of a, I've also had other type of sales jobs, and they did not last long. Like in college, I worked as a car salesperson. I was fired pretty quickly for not selling cars, as you would imagine. And I don't know if it was my personality or I don't know. It's just.
I think it was just striking good looks, Chase. I mean, they couldn't handle all the
where the. And it was also, it was the economy wasn't great. I was working at a Ford dealership, and it was one of those dealerships that had multiple brands on the same territory, owned by the same owner. And there was a Honda side and a Ford side. And this was back when Ford was not doing very well. They didn't really have very many interesting vehicles. I guess that's my excuse. And so I worked for the Ford side, and the Honda side was selling cars like crazy, and the Ford side was not. They would sell like the odd pickup truck. Yeah, I sold a couple pickup trucks, but I wasn't meeting my quotas, so they fired me. Anyways, that was kind of a sidetrack into sales. But I realized it was not for me, even though I'm a car guy. I like cars, and that's kind of why I kind of went into that. So then, I'm working as a leasing agent, kind of part-time, and leased a couple units out, and everything's a lot of work in life if you want to be successful. A lot of times you see these people who, look like they're uber successful or are successful. Behind that is just a ton of work. And I think we've talked about this before. It's just behind every hour podcast that you put together is probably 5-6 hours. I don't know how many hours of work you have, but a lot of time. It's quite an effort. And so even doing sales, doing real estate sales, it's a different type of work. It's more people type of work. You're dealing with people who, want to start a hair salon or, lease, whatever kind of retail business it might be, or whatever type of facility it might be. So I did that for a while and realized it wasn't, I made a little money, enough to pay tuition and get me by, but realized it wasn't about me. But at the time, the lady I was working for needed a new marketing site. So I put together a marketing site, and we ended up not going with it because I kind of hit the limitations of my skill set, but I loved it. I enjoyed getting into the tech stuff, opening up a text editor and playing with HTML and going through documentation and learning how to do all that stuff. I was just like totally in love with it, even though I had no clue what I was doing. And I guess you could say I still don't know what I'm doing because it's just such a huge thing. Like there's so much involved, like all the way from web page design to database to server side development. Just there's so many layers in between. But I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed that, and I was like, this is cool. And then, I kind of set the foundation to be able to build my own web application to handle the appraisal order management stuff. So, I'm one of these people who kind of think everything is connected in life. It's kind of a maybe hippie thing to say, but really everything is like in life you have to pull. Well, I think life gives you different opportunities in cross paths with different interests. So, for example, building website stuff with real estate, and life gives you these opportunities and these different threads you could pull on. And so, sometimes if you pull on threads, there's some interesting stuff on the other end of those threads. Sometimes they're dead ends, but in between that, you'll learn some new stuff and gain a new perspective. So yeah,
that's amazing. So here you are, self-educating. I mean, these days people go to the University of Google, YouTube, if you will, and it is phenomenal. I remember some time ago, I have a family member that's spent his whole career at ESPN, and there was this fascinating conversation around how much young athletes today are so much further ahead than their contemporaries even a decade ago because of the amount of, as we would call it, game tape they can study. At this point, you didn't have so much of the game tape, but you had persistence and you had interest, and that continued to fuel your development, your skill set for, coding websites and, learning HTML, talking about CSS and what have you. So how did that continue to evolve for you, Chase?
Are you running a real estate firm? Are you looking to grow your firm, streamline your operations, or prepare for an exit? Don't miss this opportunity to work with Michael to figure out your business pathway to massive success. With a growth system for business that leverages opportunities and removes obstacles that Michael has successfully taught to thousands of entrepreneurs globally. Michael's guidance will help turn aspirations into reality. Michael is a renowned figure in the real estate and business coaching worlds. As one of only 5 individuals worldwide for Entrepreneurs Organization, Michael serves a dual role, training business owner participants in the EO Accelerator program, while also upskilling EO members' impact and capacity to lead multi-million-dollar businesses. Get more out of your business. In working with Michael, you can achieve the growth, profitability, and life balance you desire. With Michael, it's not just about business growth. It's about redefining your purpose for business and for your life. If you are interested in working with Michael, contact him via his LinkedIn profile or email him at michaelh@paru.com. And now back to part 2 of the episode, where we explore new technology trends that will shape the world of real estate appraisal for years to come.
Yeah, that's a really great point. So back when I started, I had absolutely zero clue what I was doing, and I would Google stuff and find information. And the hardest part with that, being self-taught without much guidance, is you don't really know what you need to learn. So you can spend a whole lot of time learning something that's not as useful, like I mentioned, pulling threads. I mean, there are things in there that you can learn. I guess the big thing that you learn sometimes is you didn't need to spend time doing that, but that's just the way life is. But back, a decade ago, there wasn't not as many free resources out there, just resources in general for learning things online and learning programming. And so I did find some information, and I ended up finding some mentors along the way that I would, if I really got to a point where I couldn't find what I needed online by just Googling it up, I would throw some questions over and say, hey, what's going on here? Do you have a chance to take a look at this? And that was huge for my development, at least on the software side of things. But the lesson there was, sometimes, I think mentors can be really, really, really beneficial, and they're not really like a thing you go seeking out intentionally. I don't think. Sometimes you just kind of fall into a mentor. You strike up a conversation with somebody where you kind of just hit it off, personality wise, and end up being able to share information. And that's not just for programming, because that can be any industry. In the appraisal industry, it's really important to find good mentors and people to train under, and people who have kind of a teaching spirit and who are patient and have time to walk you through difficult problems. Because real estate appraisal, commercial real estate appraisal especially, it's really difficult. I mean, at the end of the day, it's an opinion value to build up all this information and analyze it, with a conclusion of, depending on the assignment. That's hard to do, and there's so much to it, and there's so many moving parts. So surrounding yourself with people who already know what they're doing, or at least a few years ahead of you, is really vital. And that's one of the reasons I like you doing this podcast, because when I started 10 years ago as an appraiser, there were no podcasts. Maybe there was, I wasn't aware of them, but there was nobody really putting out educational material. There was nobody really building community for the commercial real estate appraisal industry, other than some of the institutions like Appraisal Institute and whatnot. You pay them $500 and go take their course, and it's all great material. But if you're looking to supplement that with other people and learn from other people, your choices at the time were people you immediately know. So this is one of the reasons I think podcasts and even things like blog posts and people sharing stuff on social media. I think LinkedIn's, people like to hate on LinkedIn, but I think it's great for professional development. I've learned so much new stuff just by, browsing, LinkedIn in the morning while I'm having my coffee, connecting with people. And I've had so many good conversations. So, man, I really appreciate you doing the podcast just in general, because it introduces people to other people and other ideas that they might not have heard about before or read about anywhere else.
I completely agree with you. And one of the, we touched a little bit on it before, and just to highlight it here, we acknowledge that the ongoing success, the early success of the podcast had nothing to do, for the most part, with technology, but the ongoing success really is all about technology, and specifically social media. And we happened to pick a lane because we didn't want to be scattered by starting on LinkedIn and staying on LinkedIn, even though we know the vast majority of real estate appraisers are actually on Facebook. That's just a medium we haven't chosen to conquer yet. And whether we get there or not isn't the point. And because of LinkedIn, we've been able to connect with industry peers that I would probably never know. I mean, the first couple of seasons, people either I know or have met over the years, decades, if you will, being around the profession. But now our continued growth completely comes through sources like LinkedIn, where people are doing interesting, innovative, and sometimes even confounding things. And you're like, tell us more about that, so that we can all both get a view into your world, but also gain perspective for ourselves to make wiser decisions going forward. And, I appreciate you being a guest.
It's hugely valuable. If you're an appraiser and you're not on LinkedIn, or you haven't logged in, and maybe you created a profile 10 years ago and maybe you just had your headshot there, or you don't have a headshot there, go in there and upload your headshot and write up about, your employment history and the type of interesting projects that you've worked on before, and connect with some of your fellow appraisers. And you're going to get a lot of people, trying to sell you products and sending you in message and that sort of thing. And that's, it is a business, development, business marketing platform. But, there is a lot of noise on there, but there's also just a tremendous amount of value on LinkedIn. I haven't really touched Facebook. I haven't had a Facebook account for a long time. Now that you mentioned it, maybe I should look into Facebook. I think the difference between Facebook and LinkedIn is you're going to have more residential appraisers using Facebook versus commercial appraisers being on LinkedIn. That's an assumption that might not be true. And of course, there's obviously nothing wrong with commercial versus residential appraisers. I just think they live in different communities.
It's a good point. And I actually agree with everything you said. The only thing I would overlay with that, based on our own research, is that when you look at the demographic and where they're spending their time, the typical person in the valuation profession is not younger. They tend to be older, and that community skews towards Facebook, regardless of occupation.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Because they get on Facebook to, look at Reddit.
Some of them do.
Maybe less. Political stuff and that sort of thing. Maybe, whatever hobby groups they're into, but probably less business network. But I don't know, maybe I should take a look. That's a good point. So, doing a podcast like this and meeting with you has kind of prompted me to go pull some strings on something that happened.
Yeah, wonderful. And to kind of continue the conversation around the exposure in this case, the appraisal and valuation profession, and then identifying some challenges that are experienced. How did that evolve into what you're doing now? So you start out in the senior housing space, assisted living, residential communities for senior citizens, and you observe this obstacle, which is updating and communication and scheduling and tracking. You've got a personal interest in technology and coding, So what comes next?
Oh, that's a great question. We never really 100% know what comes next.
I'm going back to like
personally.
I'm going back to like 10 years, 10, 12 years ago. Let's take it like 12 years. Not what's coming next in like say 25 to 2028. But let's go back to like, 2012, 2013.
Yeah. So what came next was, okay, so I built this web application that did like the bare minimum to manage a small appraisal office. And I kind of hit a barrier in terms of my skill set. So that's kind of how I mentioned that I found some people to help mentor me to help overcome some of these challenges. So at the same time I was learning the ropes of software development, I was also having to learn the ropes of, and I don't like these words, but maybe if you give me a better word, but sales and marketing. People don't like these terms, and people don't like being marketed to and sold to. And that is also very much an acquired skill set. And I won't claim to be great at it, but really at the end of the day, it's just talking to people, finding out, what they're struggling with, kind of finding out how they're doing things and seeing if your solution works for them. So that was a whole skill set that I kind of did not anticipate. A lot of people have this idea is like, oh, I have this great idea. I'm going to build a tech startup, right? And I'm just going to either build it myself or hire somebody to build it, and then I'll just put it out there, and it'll be this $1 billion unicorn, and then somebody will write me a check, and then I can go retire in Hawaii. Well, it doesn't usually work like that. Once in a blue moon, you'll see a story like that. But even with those stories, there was a tremendous amount of work that went in. But there's a lot more to something. There's a lot more to building a tech business or a tech-focused business or any business really than just building the thing, generating, building the appraisal report. You also have to focus on building connections, building relationships, getting to know people, investing back into the community, having conversations going and all that sort of stuff. So that's something that I've had to spend equally amount of time investing into. And since we're a relatively small, bootstrapped, company, didn't have any investors or anything, so we had to learn all that stuff on my own. It was not like, I'll just hire a marketer. Oh, I'll just hire, I'll just buy some ads to throw out there, or I'll just hire, a salesperson. I wasn't in a position to do any of that. I had to learn all that stuff on my own. And, at first I was kind of reluctant, but then I realized in order for this to be successful, it was a part, just a part of the deal. And at first I was like, man, this part of this, stinks. I don't enjoy do this. I come from an analytical background.
Yes.
Appraiser, then doing the coding stuff. You just kind of want to sit in a room with your head down and not talk to anybody for a while, and do whatever it is you do, and produce. So it's kind of a different way of thinking, and I'm glad I was forced to go that direction. And I think the lesson that can be taken away for people running, say, a commercial appraisal firm or any kind of business is you can't neglect the relationships. You can't neglect the people side of things. Those are going to get you. Those are the things that keep you. And I've noticed with the appraisal firms that have been around for a long time, that's what they've been focused on is making sure those relationships stay fresh, and that sort of thing.
So here you are building out this solution that you come across, and at some point you come to the proverbial fork in the road, which is, or as they say in country and western music or country and western movies, you can't ride two horses. What was that defining moment for you when you're like, all right, I'm going to be in on this seemingly viable technology solution, and I'm going to be out of, day-to-day appraising?
It was mostly a question of focus, in kind of once I hit a certain customer size, I realized I need to pick one or the other. And, it's hard to be a jack of all trades, master of none, and do a good job at all of them. And I realized I was just losing enthusiasm for the appraisal work, not because I didn't like it, but because it was just back and forth. And for example, you can't really take a customer email during the middle of your workday, while you're working on an appraisal. So it was also that to free up time so I could actually, focus on, marketing and sales and just having conversations with people. If I was to start today, I think maybe you've asked this question before of people, like would I consider the commercial real estate appraisal field again? Like if I was graduating this year, my answer to that would be maybe, but it would be my answer is a little bit more nuanced than that. It would. So my recommendation for people. So I kind of have a little bit of a regret not studying computer science in college at the same time as studying real estate. So and this kind of goes back to like everything being connected. So if you're somebody who's kind of thinking about what they want to study in school, combine something that, combine two fields that aren't necessarily related and maybe minor in one of them. So, maybe study real estate and then minor and whatever it is that, that you're interested in. And you can combine those two and do interesting things that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Otherwise you could potentially get on a path of only being able to do one thing without being able to cross over, multiple interests.
And given that type of intersection, you make this choice to focus and be all in on your technology solution. What was that like, over a decade ago as you're really trying to build this out and starting to get some penetration and quite honestly put food on the table?
Yeah, it was scary. Business ventures are risky. Tech startups are risky. Starting restaurants are risky. But I've always kind of wanted to work for myself. Well, of course, it turns out you're not really working for yourself when you're in a company. Working instead of one boss, you have a whole bunch of bosses. With different personality types and different requests and requirements. But it was pretty terrifying. At the same time, I was a bit younger. Well, I was 10 years younger. I didn't, I did own a house already, but I didn't have children. I didn't have as many liabilities. So the risk was, smaller than it might be starting today. But it was still pretty terrifying to go out. Of course I knew I could always go back and this is one of the things of having multiple skill sets is I knew I could always go back to being an appraiser, or I could go down the road of being a software developer based on the acquired skill set that I had.
Oh, that is.
So if you're kind of at a crossroads, if you're out there and you're thinking about, a venture or something, to kind of measure what your runway is, how well you can go without much revenue, kind of like what your liabilities are. Make sure if you have a spouse, make sure your spouse is on board. My wife has been absolutely vital for making this thing successful. I call her my number one investor. So make sure everybody's on board. And sometimes you just have to go out there and do it and try.
Yeah, very much so. When you go back to coming out of that about decade or so period and starting to move into 7 or so years ago, what was it for you that was allowing you to start to get some momentum, start to get some client awareness, start to actually gain some footing? Because most people may not know this stat, but if you want to face death sooner, you should start a business. The fastest way to die is to start a business. More than 80% of all businesses that start are dead within 5 years. And if you actually make it 5 years, 80% of those firms that make it 5 years die in the next 5 years. So you actually, the first couple of years, You're alive. Congratulations. Great to see this. What was it for you in kind of year 2 and 3 that allowed you to keep eking out an existence? Obviously, you're doing a lot better than that these days, but it's helpful for people to understand kind of the path you went through, because there are many people in this vast industry of valuation and appraisal professionals who might also have an interest but don't really know the path. So you being able to share a little bit both lets them know how treacherous it is, but that there is a path to safety along the way.
Well, I think the number one vote of confidence is somebody using the thing that you built, or maybe you've heard appraising, you're writing appraisals and getting good feedback on your work. I think that's kind of the key, that, okay, well, this is a viable thing. People like my work product. So that was the number one, I think in the software world, they call that product market fit, when people find what you made useful and they use it consistently. And once I noticed, at first, I built up some interest and like pre-launch interest before launching Appraisal Flow, back with Appraisal Flow. And, I had a bunch of signups, and then I had a bunch of people never come back after that first day.
Yep. Yeah. So Chase, given that you had a bit of a launch, you had some, early interest, what were you doing to help build this, what at the time was known as Appraisal Flow, now is what's known as Appraisal Inbox? What were you doing to build up the existence of your technology solution?
In terms of reaching out to people or
So the answer ultimately is yes, that's what you did. What were the methods that you took? I mean, outreach is a component to it.
Okay. I put together like a little page, like a coming soon page with a little description of what we were working on, and put a place where you could enter your email, and built up a list with that. And then I just sent out an email when things were ready, or, probably could have sent it out a little bit early. One of the piece of advice is if you, basically you launch your thing that you're making sooner so you can get feedback sooner and iterate. And then so after did that, I guess it was just me at the time. So launched it, had a bunch of signups, people who were very interested, and then had a lot of people who didn't really fit their needs, wasn't what they expected, didn't have enough features, and that sort of thing. And then we had some people who are still our customers today from that initial launch. But from that, you got, we were able to get feedback, we need this, we need that, this part of the application is slow. So from that point, it became an iterative process. So just built from there. And out of that, you got to observe. It was pretty neat seeing that customers had our application open all day.
Oh,
like, for example, people who like the person working for a commercial firm who might handle the appraisal assignments in the incoming workflow, they'll have it open all day, and they'll just be in there, and they'll get on the phone with a customer or get an email, and they'll click into the order. And seeing those stats was really encouraging, and it made me realize, okay, I have something here. This is actually useful for people. People are finding value in that. And so that was sort of the vote of confidence that kept me going in the early days, not just the early days, even still today.
That's really encouraging. And one thing I'm hearing, and that I obviously overlooked, and I shouldn't have done that, which is, can you actually share with people what it is that you've created? Because many people may not be aware of your solution, and that'll help shape some of the, put context to the next couple of questions that I'd like to ask you to touch on. So what is it? What is a?
Yeah, sure. So Appraisal Inbox is an order workflow platform for appraisal companies, so appraisal firms. And what that means is it's kind of if you think about your narrative report writing software, whether that's an Excel, Word, mail merge setup, or Real Quantum or software like that, for the analysis side of things, we are the back office side of things. So we handle tracking the appraisal order through each step of the workflow, through the various statuses. So that way the entire team can log in and see where an appraisal is in the workflow. All the important dates get put into a calendar. There's a CRM component to it. So it tracks all of your customers, all your contacts, and just basically links everything together, keeps everything in one place. And that way you don't have to, shuffle sticky notes. We've had customers who used to use dry erase boards to keep up with their order workflow. But this way it's all in one place where you can log in from anywhere and see what the status of your appraisal order workflow is.
That's fantastic. And you mentioned that that's a solution for both commercial and residential professionals, ranch and farm, any type of asset would actually fit within the purview.
Yeah, that's right. So we have customers who are commercial, we have customers who are residential, we have customers who do both. So we have a small handful of, I don't know if I would even consider them direct competitors, but some similar products out there. And one place where I think they're really weak is customer relationship management, and just correctly linking your customers, because business, like we talked about earlier, businesses are all about your customer and communications with your customers. So we handle that really well. But one thing we handle that I'm pretty biased and opinionated, but coming through Appraisal Institute training and going to college and studying real estate, one thing I made a point to handle really well are the various appraisal purposes and also property types. So we have a huge list of various property types and subtypes. So like if you're appraising an industrial facility, we have industrial, but not just industrial, but all the subtypes. So maybe it's industrial distribution, or maybe it's self-storage or something like that. So we track all of that. And what that does is that basically tags it in the system so that you can run reports and see, okay, well, we've done X number of industrial properties over the last few months, and the average fee is, this and that. And all that does is it takes a couple clicks. And in the past, you'd have to build that out manually in a very fragile Excel spreadsheet, where if you mess up one formula, the whole thing's messed up. And another thing we added recently is property intelligence. So we have a public records integration. So you go and add an appraisal. All you have to do is type in the address, and it automatically, if you're in a state that's disclosure, it automatically pulls the property records. So it automatically figures out the property type, figures out the owner, adds that owner to the CRM system for you automatically, and then links it up. So basically what it does is save you a bunch of double entry, and it's especially helpful for the bidding process. So if you're bidding on an appraisal order, you might want to go do some preliminary research. In the past, you would have to go pull that up, and like we talked earlier, pull that up in property records, click through the system, see that it's 3 acres, strip retail center and whatnot, and it's owned by so and so. Well, this integration, you just type in the address and it pulls that in for you. It saves you a bunch of time on getting your bid turnaround. So those are some things that can help.
Well, that's fantastic, because what that ultimately translates into is, and I apologize, I don't recall if I heard this from you, Chase, or if it was from Mark, or if it was from previously talking to Greg. I mean, somewhere along the conversation, I'd heard someone wisely say, if you're going to do something more than a few times, why not just have one solution that solves it forevermore going forward? And I really hear you.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one of the big objectives here is to reduce double entry. Like, nobody likes filling out forms for the 5th time, with the same data. And so really the dream here is to kind of have an end-to-end thing where, the appraisal order comes all the way through the lending institution into appraisal inbox, automatically gets set up. You don't have to do anything. You can accept the bid, or not, and then assign it to an appraiser, and then it gets delivered out the other end. That's kind of the big long-term goal here. But the idea is, like, you should be focused on the analysis of the appraisal work, not running the office, not a bunch of paperwork, not filling out Excel fields. I mean, some appraisers really like that, but that's not what's paying the bills. What's paying the bill is getting, good turnaround times, accurate appraisals, and happy customers. And anytime you're messing around with paperwork and busy work, and I think there's a natural tendency for humans to do kind of like side treks that are fun, like, or that are distracting. Like, you see this in different industries and in different places, but people will go kind of like just mess around with something that's not necessarily productive work, but it feels like productive work. And one of my goals is to help eliminate a lot of that stuff so that you can actually focus on the work that gets you paid.
So using that is a wonderful segue for so many people in the profession. And a lot of people that listen to our podcast are staff appraisers. They work with or for others, but a lot of them have some amount of work that they do on their own, or they actually are responsible for a team or a company. What have you learned over the last several years that is very applicable to professional valuers and appraisers building their business?
Yeah, there's a bunch of things. I don't want to tell anyone how to run their business.
No, you're not. You're just going to share what you've seen that works. And if they see value in it, they'll say, "Oh, that's good." Or they'll be like, "Yeah, no, it's not."
We're seeing more bifurcated, and that's kind of a stupid word, but we're seeing basically teamwork
Yes.
with appraisals these days, where you have somebody go inspect the property, you have a different person pull the property records if they're not using appraisal box, because we do that for you. You have different people who do research, and you have different people who do, so you might have like 2 or 3 people working on an appraisal, and there's some pretty strong opinions out there on that. But there are, if you do it right and you validate your date and the work is properly reviewed, there are potentials for saving time there. Another thing that I'm seeing more and more is outsourcing some of that type of work to what's called VAs, so virtual assistants. And you see a lot of that out like to the Philippines, where they speak really great English, but you also see a lot of it now, just outsourcing to other states where the cost of doing, where the salaries are a little bit lower.
Sure.
And that can be really great and save time for appraisers. And one of the things that I did back in the day when I was an appraiser is I had a VA, or when I was working on I guess I could have answered that earlier. I forgot about it. It's been so long. I hired a VA to help me do some research, do some market research when I was building Flow. So I have them, put together lists of people I should reach out to and that sort of thing. So that's something we're seeing more and more. Also, just adoption of technology. If you're an appraiser who has your Excel Word mail merge set up for generating reports, that's great, but your competitors are eating your lunch. I mean, your competitors are literally getting the reports out the door, 50, 60, at least
Yeah.
half as much time because they have better solutions, better report writing solutions where, it brings in the data automatically from what you say before. So just there's a lot of efficiencies. There's a lot of this industry. Sometimes I compare the residential side to the commercial
Sure.
side in terms of appraisal work. The residential people seem to be more ahead of the curve than the commercial side for whatever reason. Maybe it's the demographics, the commercial side, but the commercial side's been slow to adopt the
Got it.
technology. And I talk to appraisers, every day, and I think there's a variety of reasons for that. I think it's kind of the introverted nature, analytical nature of appraisers, but I also think a lot of appraisers have been burnt by
Yes.
technology in the past. Overpriced stuff that just doesn't get the job done, doesn't work well, where you have to sign over your firstborn child, even to use the product. So I think with some of these older appraisers, they've been through the trenches and they've tried technology in the past, but I would say that things are a lot better now. And I would say things are actually cheaper now to implement technology solutions in your appraisal firm. And that might not be appraisal inbox. Might not be real quantum. There's other things out there. We talk to appraisers sometimes who build their own project management solution using some of these no code tools. And if for some companies that works great. And if that works for you, I encourage you to look into that route. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of places to find and create efficiencies in this.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Chase. And that kind of brings us to that next point of view, which is there are a lot of talented people with a lot of great ideas. I'm really excited. We're already booking guests for season 5 and season 6 and hearing about, you talk about some of these, what they call low code and no code options and solutions that are coming into existence. Fascinating upcoming conversations we're going to be having. But for you, as you look out,
Yeah,
excellent. I know you're working on something that kind of leads into my next question, which is as you look out over the near future and over the next 3 to 5 years, what are you optimistic about, or what are you looking forward to?
So I'm pretty fascinated by AI, and what's kind of interesting with my path here is I kind of dismissed it for a while. We had all this AI hype, I guess, kind of starting last year, maybe building up a little bit before that for early adopters. And as somebody who has a lot of experience with software, I really dismissed AI as, it's just machine learning, right? It's just, analyzing your data sets. So I put it off. You had a lot of people trying Chat GPT, and, finally my wife said, hey, Chase, have you looked at this Chat GPT thing? And I was like, oh, okay. And, she's not like, she's pretty technically literate, but I wouldn't call her an early adopter. And she showed me how she was using it with a few things with her work. And I was just like, okay, I've been sleeping on this. I've totally ignored this. And I think I need to get up to speed with it very quickly, or this is going to pass me by. So I started looking into it and found some pretty interesting immediate use cases for, say, commercial appraisers, programmers, all sorts of things. You can use it to, plan your travel, do research on your hobbies, all sorts of things, like especially with these generative AI like ChatGPT, which are trained on a vast body of knowledge. But I also ran into some blocks pretty quickly with it too, like just hallucination, incorrect information. This just like it's kind of a black box where it's not good about telling you the source of the information. And if you're an appraiser, if you're using, basically as an appraiser, you have to validate your information. You can sign your name on the report. And with some of this AI stuff, it doesn't really show you the source. So, it's kind of got its plus and minuses, but it's still really fascinating. I think we've only really cracked the door on AI technology. I think it's going to be huge. I don't think it's going to replace everybody's job. Like, if South Park, South Park taking their jobs mean. I think it's going to take all the low hanging fruit jobs like the double entry, the paper pusher jobs. It's going to just destroy all of that stuff. And, that's terrible for those people's jobs, but those aren't very high value add jobs anyways. Just like, manually harvesting wheat in the fields 200 years ago was not, it kept you alive, but compared to a harvester, there's kind of no point of that type of work anymore. Same thing with looms and everything. So I look at AI, I think of it, we talked about Google. I think about it as the next iteration of Google. Google gave us access to the world's information, or at least a way to find it pretty easily. And I think AI is a way to digest and kind of curate the world's information. And I think it's I think it's really interesting. And so I'm putting together a lunch and learn seminar, it's not really a seminar, just a lunch and learn called AI for Valuation Professionals. And it's a free thing where we just talk about, what AI from a high level. We're going to start off talking about from a high level, what is AI? What's its history? What does this different terminology mean? How could it potentially be used in the valuation industry? What are the risks of using it in the valuation industry? Just kind of from a high level. And then after that, we're going to have on some guests who are actually using AI in some form or another in their practices, in their appraisal practices. So I think it's going to be really interesting, and it's going to be an opportunity to learn about AI if you're an appraiser and you haven't had a chance to look into it too much. So that's the thing that I guess you could call it my muse right now. It's pretty interesting stuff.
That is interesting stuff. Like you, a number of our forthcoming guests over seasons 5 and 6 that are already kind of locked in will be touching on that to some degree or another. So again, Chase, thank you for sharing.
Great.
More importantly, thank you for pursuing your personal interest and passion. And as so many people in this as so many people in the profession have done, are doing, and will do, they have personal interests and things that they naturally want to learn more about. And as they learn more, they can do more. And in your case, yours has taken you on a technology path as opposed to deeper into the appraisal profession, but it's kept you near to the profession in terms of helping those that are still there actively appraising properties. So I have no idea who is going to hear this and might be encouraged, might be stimulated, if you will, to take action and pursue a little pet project. But I want to say thanks for sharing your experience to date and continue the good work that you're doing.
Yeah, man, it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed this.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned, as we draw near here to the close of the episode, you've got thoughts, you've got ideas, you've got feedback, definitely post those comments. Definitely like the podcast. And feel free to look up Chase as well. Get your own little insight on his lunch and learns. It'll be forthcoming. So with that, Chase, thank you so much. And until our next episode, we encourage you to go out and enjoy some of this budding spring into summer weather.
Thank you for joining us in uncovering how technology is reshaping the landscape of real estate valuation and appraisal. Would you do a favor for someone you may never meet to influence a future that is worth building? Please scroll down and like this podcast and share your comments. Stay engaged with us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and your favorite podcast platforms to catch every moment of innovation and expertise shared. Got an idea or suggestion? Share your thoughts and questions with us. Let's continue to grow together, embracing the tech evolution that is enhancing our industry's effectiveness and efficiency. Until next time, remember, in the fast-evolving world of real estate and technology, being a part of the change is what sets you apart. Keep creating the future by striving for excellence and innovation.